And I'm here too. The office is closed, as is the library, so I'm in a basement, which is the quietest place I could find, and quietest is a relative affair. So let's try to make do and um, continue with our classes on animal ethics. In the last few classes, I looked at some arguments from Peter Singer and Tom Regan for the conclusion that many of our practices involving animals are seriously morally wrong. Farming animals, especially factory farming, experimenting on animals and so on, are wrong. Animals have rights or something like that. We looked at some objections and some replies and the debate about those arguments. Now I want to change focus and look at an argument in the opposite direction, an argument for the conclusion that our use of animals is not wrong, for the conclusion that animals don't have rights or anything like that. And the argument I'm focusing on is from Peter Carruthers. I've uploaded one reading from Carruthers onto the Blackboard. And he has a website with some more papers and material, including some parts of his book, The Animal Issue, and I will put up some links to that too. I'm trying to follow in my presentation of his arguments the way that it goes in that book. I hope that I'm capturing it properly. Here is, let me pull up my slides again, as usual. Very low key. I hope you can see what I'm seeing. The argument I divide into two parts. The first for a certain moral theory, and the second part moving from that theory to an implication about animal ethics. The moral theory that his argument depends on and advocates is known as contractualism. And it's the same kind of theory as those theories that we looked at in the first part of the course some time ago. We covered normative moral theories, including the divine command theory and moral relativism and utilitarianism and Kant's moral theory and virtue ethics and so on and so forth. And Carruthers' contractualism, well, it's not his theory. Most famously, it's proposed by John Rawls and Tim Scanlon in slightly different forms. But it's a theory adopted by Carruthers and that he thinks is the most plausible of those theories, and that he wields in the debate about animal ethics for his conclusion that our use of animals isn't wrong. It's not a theory we looked at, and I'm certainly not going to be treating it in as much depth and detail as our treatment of those other theories, moral relativism, the divine command theory, utilitarianism, and so on. But I'll present it quickly. Carruthers' strategy in the first part of his argument is to eliminate these rival theories and to leave contractualism standing. He also thinks that contractualism gives us a lot of what we want of a normative moral theory and better than the rival theories do. You'll recall, I hope, that the big question that these normative moral theories are trying to answer is, what is it that makes a right action right? What is it that makes a wrong action wrong?
What is the common ingredient of all right actions, obligatory actions, in virtue of which they are all right? And what is the common ingredient in all wrong actions, in virtue of which they are all wrong?
So you might think that it's not a cosmic coincidence that murder is wrong, that stealing is wrong. You might think that it's not a cosmic coincidence that both giving charity and saving drowning children are morally obligatory. You might think then that there's some common ingredient to murder and stealing that make them wrong. You might think that there's some common ingredient to giving charity or saving drowning kids that makes such actions obligatory. And our normative moral theories, I hope you recall, are attempts to get at that common ingredient. Contractualism is the same. It also offers an answer to this question: what is it in virtue of which an action is right or wrong? Carather's treatment of moral relativism, the divine command theory, utilitarianism, and so on, shouldn't be so unfamiliar to those who paid attention in the first half of the course. He tries to eliminate these theories on the basis of some often stock objections. Recall, though I can't recall if this is exactly his favorite objection, but just recall some of the objections against those theories. Moral relativism says that what makes an action right or wrong is the say-so of society. So what makes murder wrong and what makes stealing wrong and all other actions wrong is that the society or the norms of the society forbid that action. What makes giving charity obligatory is that the norms of society endorse such an action. So it's the say-so of society that determines what's right or wrong, according to that theory. And we saw some of the benefits, some of the grounds on which such a theory is advertised. And we also looked at objections, right? One of the big objections that we made a fuss about was that the theory, one of the big objections, was that the theory makes intercultural evaluations very hard. We want to say, for example, that a past society that practices slavery in the US was morally wrong. We want to say that the persecution of people on the basis of their religion or ethnicity in, for example, Nazi Germany was morally wrong. But insofar as the norms of those societies endorse those actions, according to moral relativism, we can't properly say that those actions were morally wrong, which is very counterintuitive. Recall the divine command theory, which again had much going for it. It can promise a more universal morality than moral relativism can, but we saw problems with it. Apart from the fact that most atheists who think that certain actions are right or wrong, but don't think God exists, won't see in divine commands a basis for morality. We focused on the Euthyphro objection that that pressed us on the fact that if the divine command theory were true, if morality depended solely on God's say-so, then God could have just as easily and with just as much reason commanded us to murder as forbidden us to murder. Could just as easily and with just as much reason have forbidden us to give charity as commanded us to give charity. Sorry, I'm getting a little mixed up here. And thus, on the theory, it could just as easily have been true that murder is obligatory as true that giving charity is wrong. Okay, God could have made that true. It could have been true. And that's very counterintuitive. Again, it seems strange to think that that could have been the case. And it also might be religiously objectionable because it makes God's commands somewhat capricious or whimsical or unreasonable, arbitrary, if there's no standard of morality that could guide them. In the case of utilitarianism, well, this had morality depend on the consequences of our action. An action's right or wrong, just insofar as it produces pleasure over pain. An obligatory action is one that produces the greatest net pleasure over pain. An action's wrong if it fails to do that. I hope you recall some of this, and my teaching that part of the course wasn't all for waste. And we saw problems with this theory. Again, it has its attractions. It captures a lot of our intuitions about morality. It gives us the right verdict in many cases, but it seems to give us the wrong verdict in other cases. And we considered various objections. One objection, just one we made a fuss out over, was the medical sacrifice objection. So where the doctor, you'll recall, could kill one healthy patient secretly and distribute that patient's organs to save a number of sick patients, if such an action, and we can imagine a case where it would be, where the action would, if such an action would save, would maximize pleasure over pain or preferences or what have you, then the action would be obligatory. But it doesn't seem that that action is obligatory. Indeed, it might seem to be wrong. And we considered other objections, the lone stranger objection, the over-demandingness objection, and different versions of utilitarianism in response to this. And then we considered Kant's moral theory and moral pluralism and so on. Each of these theories had some motivation. Each faced various objections. And I advertised for each that it wasn't the end of the story. There are replies to these objections and further objections to the replies, and the debate's a bit interminable. But let's say that we can eliminate all of these theories. One theory I didn't discuss, I guess it's saved until now, is contractualism. Perhaps it's the last man standing, if I may. We should endorse it after we've eliminated all the others. What is contractualism? The basic idea behind contractualism is that the wrongness or rightness of an action doesn't depend on anyone's say-so, doesn't depend on the consequences of the action, doesn't depend on society's say-so, doesn't depend on God's say-so, doesn't depend on whether the action produces more pleasure than pain, or the most pleasure, or maximizes preference fulfillment, or anything like that. Rather, what makes an action right or wrong is whether the action would be endorsed by rational agents in a kind of very specific hypothetical situation. Now, I'll present a very cartoonish version of contractualism, a very simple version. There are lots of bells and whistles and to be added, and different versions of contractualism. And I'm going to make some simplifications too, but since we're not going to go into this theory in as much depth as the others, this will do, I think, for the sake of Carather's argument. Morality is what would be agreed upon by rational agents who decide what rules we should follow. Imagine a group of rational agents, people, and they are deciding on a set of rules that's to govern society, a society they will find themselves in. Okay, and they have to come to some agreement on the set of rules. Well, imagine that all these agents are guided by self-interest. They're deciding on rules on the basis, they're deliberating on the basis of self-interest. Okay, trying to get at rules that would be best for them. Now, you might think that this could lead to some exploitation. Maybe this group could gang up in certain ways to write rules to their advantage and the disadvantage of others. But there's another ingredient in this scenario. These agents who are deliberating on the basis of on rules that are to govern society and on the basis of self-interest are also ignorant of their place in society, where they will end up. They don't know whether they might turn out to be subjects that would be exploited by a set of rules that's they'd mischievously planned to use to exploit people. They might end up on the wrong side. And this veil of ignorance is supposed to make the rules very fair and just. So, again, we have a hypothetical. This isn't supposed to be a story about how morality really developed or how rules really developed, but it's a way of thinking about how we could come to just rules, how we could come to fair rules. The idea is, think about these rational agents. They're deciding on rules to adopt for their society on the basis of self-ignorance, of self-interest, but also in ignorance of their own place in society. So they don't know whether they're going to be rich or poor or male or female or what ethnicity they're going to belong to, and they don't know how the rules will bear on them in particular. So they're going to try to frame pretty fair rules that aren't going to be too mischievous or exploitative. And these rules, contractualism say, determine what's right or wrong. Morality just is the set of rules that these rational agents in these special fair circumstances would come up with. An action's obligatory if and only if rational agents in this hypothetical contract would require the action, or the rules that they come up with would require the action. An action's wrong if their contract would forbid the action. This is a very rough, simple presentation, maybe too quick, so maybe I shouldn't say simple, a very rough and quick presentation. I don't know if it's easier because I've presented it so quickly, of contractualism. I hope it makes a little bit of sense. Morality is determined, in a nutshell, by the rules rational agents would come up with in kind of ideal circumstances. So Carather's first stage of the argument, if you can recall, premises 1, 2, and 3 there, try to establish that contractualism is true. It's the last man standing after the other theories have been eliminated, and Carather's devotes a lot of attention to trying to eliminate other theories, and also to try to show more positively how contractualism gives us a lot of what we want out of a normative moral theory, in contrast to the rival theories. And the next stage tries to show how contractualism gives us a certain verdict about animal ethics. And it's because the rational agents are acting out of self-interest behind a veil that they won't create rules behind a veil of ignorance that could potentially harm them pretty badly, exploitative rules that will hurt the rational agents in this society, because they don't know which agents they're going to be. They might be on the poor side of the fence or on the rich side. Okay, they might be male, they might be female, they might, they don't know. So they're going to be careful about framing fair and just rules. But there's one thing that they do know. They do know they're rational agents. Okay, they do know that they're not going to be animals. And so out of self-interest, they won't agree to rules that are careful about the treatment of animals. Since they're acting out of self-interest, they won't agree to applying whatever just and fair rules they come up with for governing their dealings with other rational agents. They won't agree to applying the same rules to non-rational agents or animals. Here, Kukuluku is going to read a little quote summarizing this point from Carather's book.
Hello! Since it's rational agents who are to choose the system of rules and choose self-interestedly, it's only rational agents who will have their position protected under the rules. There seems no reason why rights should be assigned to non-rational agents. Animals will therefore have no moral standing under Rawlsian contractualism, insofar as they do not count as rational agents. Thank you.
Okay. And this summarizes this gets at the second stage of the argument. Premises 4 to 6. If contractualism is true, then an action's wrong if and only if rational agents in a hypothetical contract would forbid the action. That's what contractualism says. Premise 5, rational agents in a hypothetical contract would not forbid using animals, farming on animals, experimenting on animals. Therefore, the conclusion of this stage, if contractualism is true, then our use, our farming of animals, our experimenting on animals is not wrong. Our use of animals is not wrong. So putting 2 and 2 together, or more precisely in this case, putting 3 and 6 together, we arrive at our ultimate conclusion. Our use of animals is not wrong. So that's the argument, and I hope it makes some sense. What we're going to do is, as usual, consider some objections against this argument and some replies to those objections. That's going to be in our next little session, the next installment. I'll see you soon.